सॉरेन कीरकेगार्ड ने अपनी किताब फॉर अपबिल्डिंग डिस्कोर्सेस 1843 में पब्लिश की और इसमें एक डिस्कोर्स का नाम है द लॉर्ड गेव एंड द लॉर्ड हैथ टेकन अवे, ब्लेस्ड बी द नेम ऑफ द लॉर्ड। यह डिस्कोर्स इन बिब्लिकल वर्सेस के साथ स्टार्ट होता है। Then Job arose and rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell upon the ground and worshipped and said, Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. इस डिस्कोर्स में कीरकेगार्ड बात कर रहा है अबाउट द स्टोरी ऑफ द प्रॉफिट जॉब और प्रॉफिट अयूब, who was a descendant of Prophet Ibrahim. Prophet Ayub रोम में रहते थे with his wife Rahma and his 14 children, and he was immensely blessed by God. He was strong and wealthy. उनके पास वास्ट लैंड्स थे, abundant livestock था, एक righteous और beautiful family थी, और वो एक community leader भी थे who was highly respected and loved by his people. लेकिन he was never arrogant despite his status and wealth. He was always humble, he readily helped the deprived, and he always used to glorify and thank God for everything he was blessed with. कीरकेगार्ड इस डिस्कोर्स में डिस्कस करता है अबाउट हाउ प्रॉफिट जॉब और प्रॉफिट अयूब वॉज टेस्टेड बाय द लॉस ऑफ वेल्थ, बाय द लॉस ऑफ चिल्ड्रन, बाय द लॉस ऑफ हेल्थ। कीरकेगार्ड इस स्टोरी इस डिस्कोर्स में मेंशन करता है ऑफ हाउ प्रॉफिट अयूब वॉज सिटिंग बाय द फायर साइड वाइल ऑल ऑफ हिज चिल्ड्रन वर एट अ फेस्टिवल, और उनके पास एक मैसेंजर आते हैं और उनको न्यूज़ देते हैं कि ऑल ऑफ हिज चिल्ड्रन हैव पास्ड अवे। और इस टेस्ट के बारे में ये पूरा डिस्कोर्स कीरकेगार्ड ने लिखा है। कीरकेगार्ड कहता है कि प्रॉफिट जॉब या प्रॉफिट अयूब की जो सिग्निफिकेंस है वो इसीलिए है बिकॉज ऑफ हिज एक्शंस एंड नॉट हिज वर्ड्स। इन द सेम वे जिस तरह वो अपनी किताब फेयर एंड ट्रेम्बलिंग में प्रॉफिट इब्राहिम की पूरी स्टोरी नरेट करता है और कहता है कि प्रॉफिट इब्राहिम हैड द सिग्निफिकेंस दैट ही डिड बिकॉज ऑफ हिज एक्शंस, एंड बिकॉज व्हेन ही वाज पुट टू द टेस्ट ही डिड नॉट लूज हिज बिलीफ, हिज फेथ इन गॉड। और उनको यकीन था कि गॉड वुड रिटर्न हिज सन और गॉड वुड ग्रांट हिम समथिंग बेटर देन व्हाट ही वाज टेकिंग फ्रॉम हिम, एंड इट वाज बिकॉज ऑफ हिज एक्शंस एंड नॉट बिकॉज ऑफ हिज वर्ड्स दैट ही हैज़ द सेम सिग्निफिकेंस एज ही हैज़। कीरकेगार्ड कहता है, if Job had devoted his whole life to emphasizing this word, if he had regarded it as the sum and fulfillment of what a man ought to let life teach him, if he had constantly only taught it but had never himself practiced it, had never himself acted in accordance with what he taught, then Job would have been a different kind of man, his significance different. Then would Job's name have been forgotten, or it would have been unimportant whether anyone remembered it or not. The principal thing being the content of the word, the richness of the thought it embodied. यह हमें देखने में मिलता है in his reaction when the messenger told him कि all of his children have passed away. Prophet अयूब ने पहले ये नहीं कहा the Lord took. He first said the Lord gave, and then he said that the Lord took. Even when he was given such a grievous news of the passing of all of his children, पहले वो grateful थे that God first gave him everything, and then he said that God took it from him, and he did not lose his faith nor did he forget his own teachings when he was overtaken by sorrow. Kierkegaard कहता है, Job said the Lord gave. Is not this word irrelevant to the occasion? Does it not contain something different from what lay in the event itself? If a man in a single moment is deprived of everything dear to him and deprived of the most precious of all, the loss will perhaps at first so overwhelm him that he will not even trust himself to express it, even if in his heart he is conscious before God that he has lost everything. Or he will not permit the loss to rest with its crushing weight upon his soul, but he will put it away from him, and in his heart's agitation he will say, the Lord took. And thus to humble oneself before the Lord in silence and humility is indeed worthy of praise and emulation, and in the struggle such a man saves his soul, though he loses all his gladness. But Job, at the moment when the Lord took everything, he did not say first the Lord took, but he said first the Lord gave. The word is short, but in its brevity it perfectly expresses what it wishes to indicate, that Job's soul is not crushed down in silent submission to sorrow, but that his heart first expanded in gratitude, that the loss of everything first made him thankful to the Lord, that he had given him all the blessings that he now took from him. कीर्केगार्ड अपनी किताब फिर इन ट्रिम्बलिंग में जिस तरह क्वेश्चन करता है कि ही डज नॉट क्वाइट अंडरस्टैंड द इंटेंशन ऑफ अब्राहम और हिज पेशेंस और हिज टेम्परेंस और हिज करेज इवन टू कन्फ्रंट गॉड्स कमांड टू सैक्रिफाइस हिज ओन सन. उसी तरह कीर्केगार्ड कहता है कि कुछ ऐसे लोग भी होंगे जो इस इवेंट को ना ही समझ पाएंगे, ना ही उस तरह रिएक्ट कर पाएंगे जिस तरह प्रॉफिट अयूब डिड. वो 3 डिफरेंट टाइप्स ऑफ मैन को नरेट करता है और वो कहता है कि दीज आर द अदर 3 टाइप्स ऑफ वेज दैट अदर ऑर्डिनरी मैन वुड रिएक्ट टू सच अ सिचुएशन. द फर्स्ट मैन दैट ही नरेट्स वुड बी मोर सॉरफुल बिकॉज ऑफ द मेमोरी ऑफ हिज हैप्पी डेज. क्योंकि अगर तो उसने फॉर्च्यून देखी ही ना होती तो हिज पेन वुड बी लेसर. बट इन सच अ केस वेयर ही हैड सीन हैप्पियर डेज, हिज पेन इज़ ग्रेटर बिकॉज ऑफ द मेमोरी ऑफ दोज हैप्पी डेज. कीर्केगार्ड कहता है perhaps there might be someone who on the day of sorrow was also reminded that he had seen happy days, and his soul would become even more impatient. Had he never known happiness, then the pain would not have overcome him. For what is pain after all other than an idea which he does not have, who knows nothing else? But now happiness had so educated and developed him as to make him conscious of the pain. Thus his happiness became pernicious to him. It was never lost but only lacking, and it tempted him more in the lack than ever before. What had been the delight of his eyes he desired to see again, and his ingratitude punished him by conjuring it up as more beautiful than it had formerly been. What his soul had rejoiced in, it now thirsted for again, and his ingratitude punished him by painting it as more desirable than it had previously been. What he had once been capable of doing, that he now wished to be able to do again, and his ingratitude punished him with visions that had never had reality. Thus he condemned his own soul to living famished in the never satisfied craving of want. कीर्केगार्ड फिर दूसरे टाइप ऑफ मैन की बात करता है who would react differently than Job did. This type of man would invalidate the happy days because he would feel he had not enjoyed them because of the pain he feels now. He says, or there awakened a consuming passion in his soul because he had not even enjoyed the happy days in the right way, had not imbibed all the sweetness from their voluptuous abundance. If there might only be vouchsafed to him one little hour, if he might only regain the glory for a short time so that he might satiate himself with happiness and thereby learn to disregard the pain. Then he abandoned his soul to a burning unrest. He would not acknowledge to himself whether the enjoyment he desired was worthy of a man, whether he ought not rather to thank God that his soul had not been so extravagant in the time of joy as it had now become in his unhappiness. He was not appalled by the thought that his desires were the cause of his perdition. He refused to be concerned by the fact that more wretched than all his wretchedness was the worm of desire in his soul which would not die. तीसरे टाइप का जो मैन है, कीर्केगार्ड कहता है कि he would attempt to escape his grief, or he would even try to belittle whatever good days had come his way. He says, perhaps there might be another man who at the moment of loss also remembered what he had possessed, but who had the audacity to try to prevent the loss from becoming intelligible to him. Even if it were lost, his defiant will would still be able to retain it as if it were not lost. He would not endeavor to bear the loss, but he chose to waste his strength in an important defiance, to lose himself in an insane preoccupation with the loss. Or in cowardice, he immediately avoided humbly attempting to understand it. Then oblivion opened its abyss, not so much to the loss as to him, and he did not so much escape the loss in forgetfulness as he threw himself away. Or he lyingly sought to belittle the good which he had once enjoyed, as if it never had been beautiful, had never gladdened his heart. He thought to strengthen his soul by a wretched self-deception, as if strength lay in falsehood. Or he irrationally assured himself that life was not so hard as one imagined, that its terror was not as described, was not so hard to bear, if one, as you will remember that he did, began by not finding it terrifying to become such a person. कीर्केगार्ड ने अब ये 3 डिफरेंट स्केचेस पेश किए हैं ऑफ हाउ सम अदर टाइप्स ऑफ मैन वुड हैव रिएक्टेड टू द सिचुएशन दैट प्रॉफिट अयूब वाज इन. But अब वो आता है to the reality of that circumstance, to what Prophet Ayub himself did in those circumstances. He says, "Let us rather therefore turn back to Job. On the day of sorrow when everything was lost, then he first thanked God who gave it, defrauded neither God nor himself, and while everything was being shaken and overthrown, he still remained what he had been from the beginning, honest and upright before God. He confessed that the blessing of the Lord had been merciful to him. He returned thanks for it. Therefore, it did not remain in his mind as a torturing memory. He confessed that the God had blessed richly and beyond all measure his undertakings. He had been thankful for this, and therefore the memory did not become to him a consuming unrest. He did not conceal from himself that everything had been taken from him. Therefore, the Lord who took it remained in his upright soul. He did not avoid the thought that it was lost. Therefore, his soul rested quietly until the explanation of the Lord again came to him, and found his heart like the good earth, well cultivated in patience." इसके बाद कीर्केगार्ड मेंशन करता है कि प्रॉफिट अयूब never doubted God. Neither did he associate things which came from God with other people or other situations. For example, he saw everything as coming from God. He did not blame anyone else, क्योंकि he knew everything happened with God's permission, and no man could benefit or harm him if God did not allow it. He says, "The Lord took." Did Job say anything except the truth? Did he use an indirect expression to indicate what was direct? The word is short, and it signifies the loss of everything. It naturally occurs to us to repeat it after him, since the expression itself has become a sacred proverb. But do we just as naturally link it to Job's thought? For was it not the Sabeans who fell upon his peaceful herds and killed his servants? Did the messenger who brought the news say anything else? Was it not the lightning which destroyed the sheep and their shepherds? Did the messenger who brought the news mean something else, even though he called the lightning the fire from heaven? Was it not a windstorm from out of the desert which overturned the house and buried his children in the ruins? Did the messenger mention some other perpetrator, or did he name someone who sent the wind? Yet Job said, "The Lord took." In the very moment of receiving the message, he realized that it was the Lord who had taken everything. Who told Job this? Or was it not a sign of his fear of God that he thus shifted everything over to the Lord and justified him in doing it? And are we more devout, we who sometimes hesitate a long time to speak thus? कीर्केगार्ड यहाँ पे फिर बात करता है उन लोगों की who blame either themselves or others for their misfortune. For example, a person whose loved one has passed away in a car accident, they might think to themselves कि अगर तो वो इस टाइम पे घर से ना निकले होते, या फिर इस रोड पे ना चढ़े होते, या फिर वो अगर हमारे साथ गए होते, अगर वो गए नहीं होते, तो they might not have passed away in such a horrible accident. तो कीर्केगार्ड इन लोगों को मेंशन करते हुए कहता है कि these people do not put completely their trust in God. They have faith, but they have incomplete faith. वो आधी चीज़ों को मानते हैं, आधी चीज़ों को नहीं मानते हैं, because it is convenient for them to have that incomplete picture of God, क्योंकि they do not want to understand what God wants from them through certain circumstances or through certain trials that God sends their way. उनके लिए ये मानना ज़्यादा आसान है कि this thing came from the evil doings of some other person, rather than to believe that this thing came from God. It was God who sent this event or this thing along their way. कीर्केगार्ड फिर इस डिस्कोर्स के एंड पे समराइज करता है इस सारे इवेंट को, इस स्टोरी को, एंड ही एंड्स विद सम एडवाइस फॉर द रीडर एज फॉलोज. ही सेज, "We have spoken about Job, and I have sought to understand him in his devout expression without the speech wishing to force itself upon anyone. But should it therefore be entirely without significance or application and concern no one? If you yourself, my hearer, have been tried as Job was, and have stood the testing as he did, then it truly applies to you, if we have spoken rightly about Job. If hitherto you have not been tested in life, then it indeed applies to you. Do you think perhaps that these words apply only under such extraordinary circumstances as those in which Job was placed? Is it perhaps your belief that if such a thing struck you, then the terror itself would give you strength, develop within you that humble courage? Did not Job have a wife? What do we read about her? Perhaps you think that terror cannot get as much power over a man as can the daily thraldom in much smaller adversities. Then look you to it that you, as little as any man, do not become enslaved by some tribulation, and above all, learn from Job to be sincere with yourself, so that you may not delude yourself by an imaginary strength through which you experience imaginary victories in an imaginary conflict. Or perhaps you believe that such a thing cannot happen to you. Who taught you this wisdom, or on what do you base your assurance? Are you wise and understanding, and is this your confidence? Job was a teacher of many. Are you young and your youth your assurance? Job had also been young. Are you old, on the verge of the grave? Job was an old man when sorrow overtook him. Are you powerful? Is this your assurance of immunity? Job was reverenced by the people. Are riches your security? Job possessed the blessing of lands. Are your friends your guarantors? Job was loved by everyone. Do you put your confidence in God? Job was the Lord's confidant. Have you reflected on these thoughts, or have we not rather avoided them, so that they might not extort from you a confession which you now perhaps call a melancholy mood? And yet there is no hiding place in the wide world where troubles may not find you, and there has never lived a man who was able to say more than you can say, yet do not know when sorrow will visit your house. So be sincere with yourself. Fix your eyes upon Job. Even though he terrifies you, it is not this he wishes, if you yourself do not wish it. You still could not wish, when you survey your life and think of its end, that you should have to confess, I was fortunate, not like other men. I have never suffered anything in the world, and I have let each day have its own sorrows, or rather bring me new joys. Such a confession, even if it were true, you could still never wish to make. It would involve your own humiliation. For if you had been preserved from sorrow, as no other had, you would still say, I have indeed not been tested in it. But still my mind has frequently occupied itself seriously with the thought of Job, and with the idea that no man knows the time and the hour when the messengers will come to him, each one more terrifying than the last.